Welcome to the Matt and Dale podcast, episode 10.
Welcome to episode number 10. And this is a special episode. And our first guest speaker, we've got Sandra from Thrive joining us. How are we going, Sandra?
Great. Thanks for having me. Hey, everyone.
Hey, Sandra.
Yeah,
Hey.
no, this is a very exciting time for the podcast. We've been going nearly a year now, and this is our first guest speaker. So super exciting. It's great to have you
To be the first.
Yeah,
on.
good to have you here.
Yeah. So Sandra, today we're hoping to talk about neurodivergence or neurodiversity and parenting and how it might be sort of different to say neurotypical. Is that right? And maybe some strategies and how parents can really connect when there is neurodiversity at play. Yeah. But before we get started, can you just introduce everyone, our Thrive community, to what you do at Thrive?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sandra. I've been here for about 6 months. I'm a provisional psych. So in short, that basically means I'm still in training. I've got 1 more year left, and then I will be a fully fledged psychologist. But yeah, I see clients online and in person. I work with a lot of kids, obviously, which is why we're talking about that today. But yeah, I work a lot with neurodiversity, grief, separation, relationship issues, addiction. I like variety, so I do a bit of everything.
Cool.
So just for the community, what is the difference between say neurotypical and is it neurodiversity or neurodivergent? What's the right term?
It depends on what you're referring to. So neurodiverse refers to a group of people with different neurology, whereas neurodivergent refers to a single person. So a person would be neurodivergent and a group would be neurodiverse. So same but different, really. It's just the singular or the plural. But yeah, I guess the difference, there's a bit of conjecture, to be honest, about what is neurotypical anymore, because the definition of neurodiversity is growing all the time. It used to be very traditionally, well, you're either autistic, ADHD, and you're neurodiverse, or you're normal. But now the definition of neurodiversity is growing to include things like bipolar, to include acquired brain injuries, complex PTSD, psychosis. There's basically anything that is not something other than the norm, and I'm using inverted commas very deliberately there, counts as neurodiversity nowadays.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is quite diverse.
Very. Yeah, and if you think about, the difference in presentation between someone who has bipolar and experiences lots of kind of ups and downs in their mood and regulation versus someone who is autistic who, likes a lot of routine to feel safe. Like, they're very different needs. So it's not like you can say, well, if someone's neurodiverse, they need X, Y, and Z, because even between, even if you had 2 autistic people, they can have very different needs. So it's a big topic. It's a big area for sure.
And I imagine, Sandra, thanks for a really good explanation, by the way. I imagine for parents in particular, I mean, one of the challenges obviously are if the child has been diagnosed or not. So often they're dealing with, a child that's perhaps exhibiting behaviors and they can't make sense of it because there hasn't been a diagnosis of that. Do you see that a lot in terms of your professional practice?
Yeah, I think diagnosis in itself is a really it's a contentious issue in itself.
Okay.
I think a lot of, in the autistic kind of neurodiverse affirming movements, there's a lot of questions around, well, if I know that I'm autistic, why do I need someone to sign off on that? So even just the idea of getting a diagnosis can be very confronting and challenging for people, because it's almost like getting someone to sign off and approve your identity. But when you have a child that you're going, I don't know, I want to help you and I don't know what is going on, but there's something and I don't know what it is, especially, a lot of psychology, a lot of medicine is based on, cis, straight, white men and how that presents. And so if you look at something like autistic in female children or autism in women, or even ADHD in women, or, people of color, or, any of those kind of diverse intersectionalities, all of a sudden it becomes really hard to know what's going on with your child, especially when you think about what I was saying before about neurodiversity being so broad. So often, I get people who bring their kids in and they go, I don't know what's going on, but something's happening and I need help, and it can be really challenging. And it's almost like once you get the diagnosis, then things become a little easier, because you have a bit of paper that says, well, this is their needs, this is what we can label it.
Have some strategies around that then, and etc. Yeah, it can be
really,
and you've also got, I guess, really good. Sorry, I was just going to say, it must be also challenging because you've got kids, who are neurodivergent, but they're also kids, and they're still in their developmental kind of trajectory. Coupled in with all those challenges as well. So really, really challenging, isn't it?
Yeah. And then when you're working with a child, often you're working with the family as a whole.
Yeah.
And so then you've got, the hopes and dreams of the parents to manage, but you've also got, often with a lot of neurodiverse conditions, there's a hereditary factor. So you've got mum and dad have got their own neurodiversity, and they may or may not be aware of that. And then you've got the kid who has maybe the same diagnosis but completely opposite needs, and they're rubbing up against each other. And then you've got mum and dad who you're thinking, well, maybe I think you're diverse, neurodiverse as well. And there's the grief around them never knowing that, and what supports they could have needed. And
then you've got family systems as well weaved into that. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
right.
It's just such a big topic, which is why I find it so interesting to work with.
Thank you.
I get the feeling it would be very validating for not only the child, but also the parents as well, if there is a diagnosis.
It can be really mixed. Okay. I think in some ways, sometimes, and especially one thing I haven't mentioned is pathological demand avoidance, which is something that I work with a lot and is not as well known. But that has a very specific and very challenging presentation. And often with that in particular, I'll get parents saying, look, I know they might be autistic, but there's something else. And it's just really hard, even when we're trying to accommodate for the autistic needs, they're really challenging still, and we're still really struggling. And to know that the thing that is making things so hard has a name can be really validating. Like, it's not just that I'm a bad parent. It's not just that my kid is broken. That can be really helpful. But then there's also the grief around, well, my kid has a diagnosis that nobody understands, that is going to make it hard for them to move through the world, that I then have to grieve not having the child that I thought I had, which then comes with the guilt of, I didn't think I was projecting all my hopes and dreams onto my child, but we all do. We all have hopes and dreams when kids come along, and then you've got to then grieve the loss of that, and reconcile what it means to be the parent of a child with extra needs. And it's huge.
Yeah. So, can you just explain to everyone, Sandra? Was it pathological demand avoidance, PDA?
Yeah.
What actually is it?
Basically, the way that I describe it is that kids with PDA, or people, adults with PDA, are their brain is hardwired to perceive any loss of autonomy as a threat. And when you think about, I think for kids in particular, adults with PDA obviously struggle, and I fully acknowledge that I am sitting here as someone who does not have lived experience with PDA. I don't have it myself. But for adults, we have a lot more control over our life in general. We can pick the clothes we wear, we can choose what to have for breakfast, all that kind of stuff. With kids, there's very little freedom that kids have in their life anyway. And if, the usual parenting stuff of, it's time to go to bed, it's time to put your shoes on, you can't hit your brother, all that kind of stuff. Every single time you do those things, it becomes a demand on the child, and that demand then activates their nervous system into a fight or flight response. So it's almost like by asking your child to brush their teeth, you're, chasing them like a bear, and all of a sudden they've got this bear chasing them, and their body's trying to escape this threat. And all you've done is asked them to brush their teeth, But then for a PDA child, it goes even further, because a demand is the knowledge that they live in a society where there's laws, and there's existing social structures they have to exist in. It includes things like internal body sensations. So the need to eat, to not feel hunger, that's a demand. The need to put a jumper on because they're cold, that's a demand. And so when you think about every single little thing that activates their nervous system into a fight or flight response, it kind of, like, I get a lot of parents who, when I explain this definition of a demand, they go, oh, so they're only melting down 3 times a day and this is what they're coping with. I'm like, yeah, like it's a lot for anyone's body. And then you put that in the context of, you know, they are a child, they don't have the emotional impulse control, they don't have the emotional understanding that adults do. It's kind of no wonder that these kids are struggling so much.
And when it was really interesting when you said fight or flight response, I presume like absconding would be potentially one of the behavioral traits, perhaps, of
Very
someone
much so.
with PDA.
Yeah, there's a specific term, I can't remember what it's called now, but there is a specific term that's used to describe that behavior in kids with autism who, and not specifically PDA kids, but autistic kids do have that tendency to take off. And that can be really challenging, you know, for safety reasons. Obviously, you can't have kids running around on roads and that kind of stuff.
So in terms of being able to emotionally regulate, I've just got a little perhaps case example for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Working in the behavioral support space at the moment, and child with autism plus PDA. So with PDA just isolated on its own, the emotional regulation of someone with PDA, can that also be compromised? Or when autism is also weaved into that, it would also kind of create that cocktail, for want of a better phrase?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of research around comorbid diagnoses with PDA. It doesn't tend to exist on its own. It's very, I mean, some theories say that it is actually a specific type of autism. And there's also, there's one study in particular that links ADHD with PDA without an autism representation as well. But I mean, theoretically, if you had a child who was PDA and was not neurodiverse in any other way, they would struggle to regulate for sure. Yeah.
I see quite a few young people who have been diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. So what is the difference between PDA and
Great
ODD?
question.
Yeah, I love this question because I actually did my thesis on this exact question. So fantastic question. Often, and whenever I get a child come in who the parents are like, oh yeah, they're autistic and they're ODD, I go, yeah, let's do the PDA screening test because I'm fairly sure it'll be PDA instead. But the difference basically is that, and it can be quite tricky because PDA autistic kids present a lot more socially motivated and a lot more socially skilled than a classic autism presentation. So they do tend to use social social ways to get out of demands. So people think that PDA is go brush your teeth. No, I'm not going to. But what it actually is go brush your teeth. No, I can't because my legs have just turned to jelly and I can't walk anymore. You know, or it's I can't do that right now because I'm playing a game and I'm a wombat. Wombats don't brush their teeth. You know, like they're really creative and often quite funny ways to get out of these demands rather than the typical no, I'm not going to do that.
Wow.
But the main difference between ODD and PDA is that a PDA will resist a demand even when it's a desired thing. If they really love going to the cricket and you say, hey, we're going to put our shoes on and go to the cricket, they will not do it because they can't. Whereas with a child with ODD, it's about resisting a demand from an authority figure. And often it's to either get a desired result or to increase social standing. So with ODD, you see quite often that they will resist, say, a teacher's request because their mates think it's funny and they'll get like brownie points with their mates. Whereas a PDA child will be resisting because they actually, like their nervous system won't let them.
Amazing. That is a big thing I've just learned. Thank you so much, Sandra. So what I'm hearing, it's like PDA comes more somatically. It's like literally their body won't allow them. ODD comes from more of a social standing. So is that what I'm hearing, or is Is that the biggest difference, or?
I think if the child had enough knowledge and self-awareness, then you could probably make that distinction. I think the difficulty is that a lot of children and people in general wouldn't have the ability to say, well, yeah, that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
You know, it's with ODD, it tends to be, and I'll admit I'm not as across ODD as much as I am with PDA. But from my understanding, it tends to be more of a, you're an authority figure and I need to avoid the authority figure itself.
Yeah.
And kind of take a little bit of power back in that way. Whereas PDA is like it's a fight or flight response.
So thank you. Thanks for that. So with PDA, you talked about loss of autonomy, that they react to a loss of autonomy. So based on that, what could the parents do around their behaviors towards the child to perhaps, I presume, promote autonomy, yet still they've got to raise the child, I guess, with some discipline. That's a really difficult
As soon
one.
as you started talking, I could feel the question that was coming, because it's always
I had to kind of verbalize it a bit just to kind of get it out.
It's well, what the hell do I do with that information?
Yeah. How do I use it?
Yeah, and it's a really tricky thing. I think PDA it's a very nuanced thing, and often a lot of the traditional parenting techniques of like praise the behavior you want to see, ignore the behavior you don't like all of those things, even praise is a demand, because when you're saying, hey, I really like when you act in this way, you're then creating an expectation that they continue to act in that way. So you can't even reward good behavior, because then that becomes a demand and sets off their nervous system. So a lot of the conversations I have with parents especially is around, what are the bare minimum rules that you need in your house? And it often comes down to me saying things like, if your child refuses to shower for 2 weeks, are you genuinely okay with that? If your child doesn't want to eat dinner at the table, are you genuinely okay with that? Like, can you accept that? Because they're really basic things that, you want your child's body to be healthy, you want connection and unity in your family and that kind of stuff. And it becomes a case of like removing absolutely every demand that you can possibly remove. The rules around like, I'm not going to let you hit your sister, they're fairly, we need rules like that. But other than that, the key way to help someone with PDA is to remove as many demands as possible. And that includes things like asking questions and trying to engage them in conversation. I talk a lot about rephrasing questions, like you pick the kids up from school and instead of saying, hey, how was your day? Like, that's a demand, because then they have to answer that question. They have to engage in a conversation. So if you change that question of how was your day to a statement and just say something like, hey, I was thinking about you today and I was wondering how your day was, and just let it hang, then that becomes, it's an open invitation that they don't have to engage with, and it can be a little easier.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So really the parent, what I'm hearing, it sounds like the parent really needs to, like, any sort of beliefs that they've learned along the way with how they were parented, that kind of has to be literally put aside.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of
that's big. That's really big, because the parents, no offense, parents, very challenging job, but they've got their own conditioning, and particularly if they've got their own conditions that they've been, they're inherited too, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. We parent in the way that we were parented often, and it requires to fully support a PDA child requires a complete worldview change. And I was talking to Matt a bit earlier about there's an author, Sarah Ockwell Smith. She's a British author, and she released a book about 2 years ago called Because I Said So. And it's a book all about the discrimination against children. And it's a really fascinating look at the things that we just expect kids to put up with because they are children, and that we would never expect any other group in society to put up with. And it does really require a lot of inner work to parent a child with PDA supportively.
Gosh.
What a journey it must be for the whole family.
Yeah, very much so. And then, you consider the siblings as well. The sibling dynamics of if the PDA child is the younger child, they are constantly overshadowed by their older sibling who is going to be smarter, faster, stronger, learning more things. And so they're constantly in this nervous system activation of, I'm being beaten. But then if the PDA child is the older child, they have a very ready-made person that they can overpower to get back that sense of control and autonomy. So having a sibling who's a PDA is also it's a tricky thing to manage.
So just come back a step, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Again, thinking of my personal example.
Yeah.
So if they're the older child with PDA and you've got two younger siblings, what was the what was the dynamic you just talked about? Could you just repeat that?
I was going to say, as I was talking, I realized that I've missed explaining a crucial thing. So there's this thing called equalizing that PDA children especially will partake in, and it's this. Basically, it's this behavior where they feel like, oh, I'm losing control, or I'm not. I don't have autonomy. I don't have control in this situation, so I'm going to bring down everyone around me so that I feel in control again.
Yep.
And it's a really tricky thing to watch when you have kids that will physically lash out, will verbally lash out, will destroy their siblings' things. And then once that nervous system activation has passed and they're settled again, they feel this immense guilt because PDA children tend to be quite relationally motivated and very connected with family members. And then they have these responses and they do these things that they, in the moment it feels good because they're getting back that sense of control. But then afterwards they feel such a sense of shame. And so, that's what I was talking about with if the PDA child is the older child, there's, one or more children in the family who are automatically beneath them in terms of control and power. And so they have these ready-made scapegoats, basically, who can be really targeted because they're the easy way to feel in control.
So I'd imagine really, really great. So the guilt and shame, which would probably cause the low self-esteem as well.
Massively.
And keep reinforcing that. Yeah.
Wow.
And, what a tricky thing.
Yeah, and when you think of systems like schools, your kids grow up, they go to kinder and they go to school. Schools are full of demands, absolutely full of demands. And you get PDA kids who get labelled the bad kids because they keep acting out where they're activated all day and they actually can't do different. It's not a case of they enjoy getting into fights all the time or they enjoy destroying other classmates' things. They actually can't not do that.
And then,
also, how do you manage that?
And then obviously, pent up at school all day, get home, it all comes out.
That restraint collapse, for sure.
Yeah.
Actually, I saw a study the other day. I don't know if you guys are aware of this one, but kids under the age of 12 who are neurodivergent have been criticised 20,000 times more than a neurotypical.
Yeah.
20,000 times more.
Yeah.
Is that so when you say they've been criticized that much more, is that true criticism or is that perceived criticism by the child?
Things like you're lazy, you don't try hard enough.
So serious criticism. Yeah. Wow.
Interesting point to bring up though, Dale, because there's also in neurodiversity, there's alongside neurodiversity, there can be something called rejection sensitive dysphoria as well.
Yep.
Which, a lot of people have heard of, but the idea of perceived criticism as well is a really interesting thing. Because I know we're talking about PDA a lot, but it doesn't have to be a genuine sense of a loss of autonomy, but just a perceived loss of autonomy is enough. The child's perception is incredibly important in that.
Yeah, and cognitive distortions, whether they're neurodivergent or not, proliferate. When the world is all about me. Obviously in those developmental years. Yeah. Oh wow, what a tangled web. Yeah.
Which is why I love it. It's so complex and it's so
it really is
amazing. Yeah.
If we can just move a little bit onto autism, this is fantastic. But I often hear parents, and I know this was very common growing up, but when a child's speaking, an adult might say, Now you look at me while I'm talking to you.
Mm.
But what
Yes.
we know from autism, to actually look at someone can be very dysregulated.
Yeah.
So I know I just thought, and I still do today. I hear these kind of things, and I can't help but wonder, if only we knew more
Mm.
about what this child actually needs, and
Mm.
that I'm actually playing with fidgets now,
Me too.
but like using fidgets and that kind of thing instead of like saying things like, "Don't be
Mm.
disrespectful,"
Yeah.
like stop, you're not paying attention to me, and but actually learning, tools like that.
Mm.
I just think how much different would the world be, or
Yeah.
adults, today if they got the resources, uh, what we know now,
Yeah.
how much things could change.
Absolutely. And it's not all doom and gloom. Like I was having a conversation with a parent recently about, their child's diagnosis and how there are a lot of challenging things to manage. But when you think about these children who are growing up, and if you frame the negatives of the diagnoses as positives, you look at all the incredible things that neurodiverse people have done. There's so many examples. Alan Turing was autistic, and he was a whiz, and made so many advances. He's the first one that comes to mind. I can't think of any off the top of my head now that I've put pressure on myself. But there's so many, yes, a person who is ADHD hyperfixates and then just really can't stand to look at something. But that is an incredible strength when you need someone who is going to completely deep dive into a topic and completely get immersed in it and can then give you the niche information about it. There's PDA kids have an intense sense of justice, and they are more likely to stand up for other kids in the playground being bullied. It's because they don't have that, well, I'm not going to do that because of social hierarchy. They're like, no, that's unfair. And it's a really difficult thing to do. And PDA kids are great at it. It's not all doom and gloom, but it is very tricky to
I've
try to do.
definitely noticed that justice,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure with clients.
Yeah.
And I love seeing it. The amount
Mm.
of passion that,
Yeah.
autistic or ADHD clients have, like, to be honest, I think it's remarkable. And
Yeah.
it can be, I don't know, such an advantage to have when and I could see, like, growing up, these people make great lawyers,
Mm-hmm.
there'd be great occupations, I
Yeah,
feel like.
absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah, and there's a theory. I can't remember where I heard this now, but um, there's this kind of theory that like around the argument that, well, autism didn't exist in my day, which I think is very funny because people will say that and then they'll also say, oh, but Uncle Jim, he only went out to dinner on Tuesdays, he had to wear the same pair of pants every Saturday, and he really liked trains, but autism didn't exist back in the day. But there's this theory around, there's increased diagnoses of autism, ADHD, etc., around it being an evolutionary adaptation to the human race needing to progress more quickly in certain ways, and that we need more people with these abilities to, hyperfixate or to, whatever. And that's why it's becoming more prevalent. I don't know any basis around that, but I just thought it was a really interesting way of thinking about neurodiversity as a kind of an evolutionary adaptation rather than well, we've got our normal people and then we've got the rest of them. It's an interesting way to think about it.
But there's also a beautiful innocence as well that comes with it too, isn't
Mm.
there? When you're working with kids. I mean, I'm thinking just more with autism at the
Mm.
moment, but um, yeah, where I just don't understand why people would do that. You
Yeah,
know, there's just that it just doesn't connect, which in a great
yeah,
way,
yeah, yeah. And I love
which
that
I
because,
presume that would also potentially make them, for want of a better phrase, gullible in some situations, which
yeah,
is
more vulnerable
unfortunate
for sure.
because they can get taken advantage of
Absolutely, yeah,
and do.
yeah, absolutely. But I think it's
Mm.
a great thing. Um, yeah, I find it really interesting when I'm in sessions with parents and they'll say, oh, well, I told my kid to do whatever. And the kid turned around and said, well, why do I have to do that? And the parents get, well, that's disrespectful and blah, blah, blah. And I say, yeah, but why did they have to do that?
Mm.
And the parents actually have to sit and reflect, and because it's coming
Yeah.
from an adult, they do. But it's this really great, if you allow them to, if you allow that discomfort to go, actually, what are my values as a parent? Why do I need them to brush their teeth twice a day? Why do I need them to read a book every night? Why do I need, it's really a great way to get really clear on what's actually important to you as a parent.
So that could be a strategy in itself, right? Because if the parent then turns back, and it's an opportunity for self-reflection and
Absolutely.
growth
Yeah.
in their own, their own parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it
Mm.
takes away the fight, which then takes away the nervous system activation for a kid, which then
Yep.
allows them to enter into that dialogue and be more receptive to demands.
And it would
It's a really
also,
interesting
it
paradox.
also, I would imagine sort of reduce the nervous tension in the parent if they're doing
Very.
self-reflection because the charge goes away as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I had a
Uh,
child in session a couple of weeks ago who, I said to them, well, this is the structure of the session, and I use visual cues a lot and all that kind of stuff. And
mm,
it got to the end of the session, and I said, oh, for the last 10 minutes, mum and dad are going to come in. And I lost track of time. By the time mum and dad got in, it was only 7 minutes. And so I said, oh, I'm going to set, I use visual timers, and I said, oh, I'm going to set the timer for 7 minutes. And the child turned around and went, you lied. You lied to me. You said it was 10 minutes. And that you could tell this child was really building up to this fight. And I turned around and said, you know what? You're right. I did lie and I didn't mean to, but that was wrong. And the child's whole
mm.
body just went, oh.
They're
So
like
that's that
truth
justice.
detectors.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely. And
Sorry,
they're
Matt.
really
Yeah,
good at holding you accountable. Because,
yeah.
yeah,
I stuffed up. And that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Very honest.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
have to be.
Sandra, just for the listeners out there, if they suspect their child might be neurodivergent, what would be the next step or steps that they would follow in order to see if that was the case?
It really depends on what kind and what their motivation is. I think I have the conversation a lot with parents around should I get my child diagnosed, and I think it really depends on what the need is. I think if they're needing, obviously if they're accessing NDIS or something like that, obviously you need a diagnosis for that.
Yeah,
If a child's having behavioural issues, you need support for that. If you think a child is autistic or ADHD or whatever, and you're able to manage it as a family, there's not necessarily a need for a diagnosis.
Mm.
Um, it's more, yeah, I would say it's more around what behaviors do you think you cannot manage as a parent or as a family? And what are we struggling with? And having a really honest look at yourself and saying, you know what, this is too big for me as a parent. As a
yeah,
family, we can't manage this.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think there's some great online resources if you want information. But I think getting a really good occupational therapist are great with kids because they're very much about doing and learning and building skills and that kind of stuff. And getting a really good either play therapist, art therapist, psychologist who really gets it. Because I
yeah,
think it's one thing to, do the course and know the terminology and, I've done the things, but it's another thing to have a really embodied, deep understanding of neurodiversity and, be able to really work with that effectively. It's a really different thing.
yeah.
Did that
I'm
answer?
hearing, yeah, yeah. I'm hearing like whoever they're with, it's important that they feel safe with that person. They really connect with that therapist.
Yeah. Yeah, it sort of doesn't. I mean, it's the same with it with everything really, and even as adults, the research shows that the type of therapy you do, the type of intervention you get, is not necessarily important. What's important is the fit. So if you have a really great fit with a therapist who does CBT, great, it'll work. If you have a really terrible fit with a therapist who does CBT, it's not going to work. If that same person had a great fit with a therapist who did psychodynamic therapy, it's going to work. Terrible fit, it's not going to work. So it's all about fit and relationship for sure.
And it's a big thing, and that's what we're about at Thrive. It's about aligning the clients to the clinician that they're going to connect with.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's why I like working here.
Yeah.
I was going to say, just finally, Sandra, can you come back?
Yes.
I can talk about
Sorry,
this all day.
I think this was really great. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed hearing you and just kind of tapping into some of your wisdom and your knowledge. I thought it was really, really great. Really good
Yeah.
flow. What did you think,
Yeah.
Matt?
I absolutely love this. Like I've learnt so much. We did have a bit of a script, and I
Yeah, yeah.
like I don't think I answered did one of those questions. I don't know about you guys,
We can do a
but
part
it's
two.
just I know I feel like this could have gone for hours.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
because we try and keep these pretty minimal because we know that a lot of the viewers or the listeners have busy schedules, and
Yeah,
we
for sure.
do try to condense them into sort of 30 to 40 minutes. So
Yeah.
no, I'm with Dale. I think it would be great to have you back on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Yeah, because I know, speaking for myself and probably Dale, we just love the passion and the enthusiasm that you bring, and it's a shining light to have you in the Bendigo building. That's for sure. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and just to kind of just something that's coming up for me, you've really humanized,
Mm,
neurodivergence, I think today really, really well, and some of the strengths and the opportunities,
mm,
within the family structure and working with and parenting kids with
yeah.
neurodivergence. So thank you.
No, thank you. I think it's a really big value of mine is to kind of see the person behind the diagnosis. So I appreciate that's a big compliment. Thank you.
And Sandra, if parents would like their kids to see you, how would they get in touch and to book a session?
So I believe you can just call the office, or I think I'm on Halixy, maybe. But yeah, if you go onto our website, there's you can find my profile, which says a little bit about me and how I work and that kind of stuff, and booking on the
Cool.
website.
And I can imagine too, for parents to see you and to get strategies would be really helpful as well.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the work I do, it's like 30% is about building skills with the child, and another 40% is changing the environment, and then yeah, the last bit is actually educating and helping the parents kind of challenge their own stuff. Really, so I tend to work with the entire family rather than just the child.
Mm,
Yeah,
good stuff. Thank you.
yeah, really great, Sandra. And yeah, once again, we appreciate you accepting to come onto our podcast as being the first guest speaker. So
Thanks.
no, it's been really great, and yeah, we really hope that we can have you on again very soon. That would be
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dale.
Thanks, Matt.
Adios. If you or someone that you know needs immediate support, please see on the screen a list of hotlines you can call. And to book in with a clinician at Thrive, you can phone the reception or book online. And remember, you're never alone.